In a world that celebrates being first, loud, and self-promoting, Jesus chose humility. He chose service. He chose obedience. Well, today on Living Hope Today, we're going to explore why humility isn't weakness. It's spiritual strength. Stay with us. And welcome back to Living Hope Today. And I'm Torrey Antone, and it's so glad to have you joining me again this week for another episode of Living Hope Today. So glad to have you along. And for those of you who may not have joined us for last week's broadcast, we began a brand new series on the theme Unchained Hope, Paul's Lessons from Philippians. And we focused on chapter 1 in the book of Philippians, speaking about the topic that joy can't be locked up. Well, as we learned, the Apostle Paul wrote these letters while chained in a prison in Rome. We are finding how inspiring this book was just by studying the first chapter, knowing Paul's situation when writing this book of Philippians. Now, if you were not able to see last week's introductory and first lesson in this series, I invite you to look in last week's archives of broadcasts and avail yourself to watching that study. It'll help you as we go ahead in these new studies. So I hope you'll do that. Now, this week, we begin part 2 in this series. And I want to look at chapter 2 to understand Paul's lesson on what I'm subtitling this, the power of humble living. The power of humble living. Well, in this chapter, we read Paul's admonition for us to live differently, to make sure that we place obedience over pride. And Paul begins with this challenge. Let's look at this. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Well, you know what? That's kind of countercultural today, especially in a season of life where we may feel we've earned the right to put ourselves first. But you know, Paul points us to Jesus. He says this, who being in very nature God, made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Well, you know, Jesus had every right to claim authority, yet he chose the path of surrender. We read in Philippians 2:8 further in this, it says, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. You know, humility, Paul teaches, is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking less about yourself. Not less of yourself, but it's thinking less about yourself. You know, we read on further that Paul then encourages believers to live with what? With integrity. Look what he says in Philippians 2:14. It says, do all things without complaining and disputing. Well, you know, that verse lands close to home, doesn't it? Complaining can quietly drain your joy and even weaken your faith. But instead, Paul tells us in Philippians 2:15, we go a little further. Paul says, you shine as lights in the world. Well, you know what? As we grow older, our lives speak loudly. Our faith, patience, and humility may be the clearest testimony that others will see. And, you know, to be honest, humility is not easy, especially after years of responsibility, sacrifice, and maybe your experience. Humility can feel like something we've already maybe done enough of. We've done that. We've been there. We've done all that. But Paul reminds us that humility isn't something we graduate from. It's something that we grow into. Jesus didn't humble himself because he lacked authority. He humbled himself because he had it. He had authority. That's a powerful truth for us in our season of life. So, here's a challenge I want to give you. I want you to pay attention this week to the moments where you feel the urgent need to insist, correct, or protect your position. I want you to pause and ask yourself, what would it look like to respond the way Christ did? You know, humility doesn't make us smaller. It makes us more visible. We can be seen. It makes us grow. And in a world that is filled with noise and status and self-promotion, a life marked by quiet strength and grace still shines brightly. It's that kind of life that leaves a legacy worth passing on. So as we begin this series, and I'm going to bring it to a close here, Paul leaves us with a kind of a freeing truth that you are not called to relive the past. You are called to instead move forward with purpose. Now, whether your past holds regret or accomplishment, neither of those things defines where God is leading you now. Paul has every reason to dwell on what he had been or to rest on what he had already done. Instead, he chose to keep pressing forward, to move forward in his life, not looking back. You know, that choice matters, especially in this stage of life. So here's a challenge I want to leave with you. I want you to identify one worry you've been carrying alone. Maybe one thing that you keep replaying in your mind. Maybe one area where peace just feels out of reach. Then I want you to ask yourself, what will it look like to release control of all that and instead trust God with it today? You know, peace, it doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from knowing who holds the future. And as Paul reminds us, whatever lies ahead, we don't face it alone. So always remember that we are protected by Christ, and he guides us. He leads us. He takes us forward in life. I hope you'll remember that this coming week. And I hope you've enjoyed this second study today. And I want to thank you for spending this time with me here on Living Hope Today. I trust that you'll take this scripture that we've read today and to remember to keep pressing on with your faith, that you'll press on with purpose, and that you'll continue with hope. That's what this series is all about. I hope you'll do that. Until next week, may the Lord bless and keep you.
Thank you for joining us for Living Hope Today. If you have any questions, have a prayer request, or just want to connect with us, here are some ways you can reach us. We would love to hear from you. We trust you will be sure to like, subscribe, and friend us on either our Facebook page or YouTube channel. Be sure to join us next week at this same time for another episode of Living Hope Today.